Good evening, everybody. Thank you. It's marvellous being in a room full of teachers. Somebody just said shush. It wasn't me, but that was great. Thank you very much. It's actually very nerve-wracking talking in front of a load of teachers. My husband's one, and I have to live with him shouting at me from the settee because he thinks I'm at the back of the class. So anyway, welcome. I'm the CEO and President for Europe, Middle East and Africa, and now India for Cengage Learning. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's a fantastic place. I'm sure you'll agree it's a great venue. I was hearing earlier that when Michelle came to assess the place for the launch, they were treated to the sight of a drag queen entering down the escalator. So I'm sorry to say I won't be in drag and I won't be going down the escalator. It won't be quite as exciting. But I do have a few words I want to sort of say, I want to share with you. And the first thing to say is that I'm a second language learner myself. It's St David's Day today, and a few people have asked me why I'm wearing this, and it's because I'm from Wales. And I'd like to say something in Welsh, okay? So bear with me, because this is my second language, all right? So I'm actually going to read it, but because I couldn't quite remember some of the more complicated words. So, mae'n pleser I mi gyfarfod chi yma heno, a ddiwrnod pwysig iawn, Gwyl Dewi Sound. And that means my pleasure to welcome you here this evening on this special day, St David's Day. Okay, I'm going on to the second sentence now, which gets even worse. Heno, mae hi'n fraint. By the way, does anybody speak Welsh here? Because this could be really embarrassing. Heno, mae'n fraint mi siarad am gwrs newydd ardderchog gyda. Dysdaeryddiaeth cenedlaethol bywyd. And what that means is, and I might say the last sentence again, this evening it's my privilege to speak to you about an excellent new course with National Geographic Learning, Life, and bywyd is life in Welsh. And it's fantastic to be here doing this. It's a particularly appropriate place to do this because obviously the whole theme resonates with National Geographic. That's brilliant. We're delighted to be working with them to produce this project, and I'm going to introduce the authors and our speaker, one of the photographers, in a moment. I'll come to that in a second. It's also very appropriate because the gallery here actually opened, and the first exhibition was called Treasures of the Earth. And I think, you know, in a rather corny way, we've got a bit of a treasure here with life. And it's also appropriate because we've got 6 figures out there. I don't know if you sort of really recognised all of them. One of them's Gaia, and I wasn't quite sure where we were going with that. But basically, they were put there to show how previous generations viewed the Earth, and life is based on learning English via exploration of the world. It seems completely to tie in. That's all a little cheesy, but what I wanted to say is I spent the entire train journey here, over an hour, looking through the first 3 units of the product, and I have to say I was absolutely blown away. I couldn't stop looking. I didn't write my speech. I actually just looked and looked and looked at the books. And I want to thank particularly, it's Helen Stevenson who wrote B1 Plus Intermediate. I just want to say if she gets a chance to make a correction in one of the books, and don't worry, it's not a typo. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with the English. It's fantastic. It's just a sort of maybe a kind of factual correction. Is it talks about the Indian superhighway. And I don't know if anybody's looked at the books. It's about a girl called Meena who has no driving license and tries to go on the Indian superhighway. And I was on the Indian superhighway last Saturday. And I have to say, after I'd seen the camels, the elephants, the rickshaws, the bikes with entire families on, trucks coming the wrong way, it says there, Meena probably won't crash. I think it might need a bit of an edit next time round. Okay, so there's lots of fun stuff in there. The author's going to talk to you a little bit about the books, and then we're going to have a talk from Chris Rainier, who's one of the fantastic photographers from National Geographic. But just say a little bit about the authors. I want to introduce them. First of all, Paul Dummett, and it's in alphabetical order, so no particular order other than alphabetical. And Paul's currently director of the E&O Online Learning Limited, and he started his EFL career in 1986. He's known to many of you. He was a teacher of general English, and basically for the last 10 years has worked on writing and delivering courses. And I've met Paul a couple of times. He's absolutely fantastic, very well known. John Hughes has been teaching for over 15 years and prepared students for BEC at 3 levels. He's run business English departments all around the place in Poland and Italy and organised teacher training courses for various qualifications. And he's written quite a number of course books and also written for publications such as The Guardian Weekly. So he's currently working in online development as well, so that's an interesting theme. And Helen Stevenson is currently at the Open University of Catalonia in Spain and first taught business English in the 1980s. I just started to have a very interesting conversation with her about her VSO work, but we didn't really have a time to conclude that conversation, so I'd love to pick that up later, Helen, which would be great. And she's still got a northern accent, which is fantastic after all that time in Spain. So without further ado, I want to hand on to the authors and to hand over to Chris, who's waking eagerly at the back because I've got to hand over my mic to him, actually. So he and I have got a sort of little bit of a relay going on there. But just to say, in the Welsh that I do know, llongyfarchiadau, and that's congratulations to everybody, I pawb, for creating this fantastic series live. Well done, it looks absolutely brilliant. So please enjoy, and I'm going to hand over to the authors now. Thank you.
Right, good Lord, that's loud. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We've got to stand here apparently, so we're going to look like Morecambe and Wise during this. My name's John Hughes, this is Paul Dummett, Helen's over there. Thank you very much for coming to this amazing venue. Normally when I give talks to ELT teachers in different conferences and different parts of the world, I'm asked to do workshops and indirectly promote a book. I'm normally the brief from the publisher is something on the lines of promote the book but don't mention it. This evening I feel on safer ground, added to the fact that my audience have been drinking for an hour, free wine. I think we're fairly safe. So very briefly, we've been asked to give you a little insight, a little talk into how these books were put together, how we transferred National Geographic into EFL course books. Somebody's mentioned there were 3 authors. You'll notice the way we started this process was one author on each book, their name is in larger letters. That means they were the main author on the book, and then the other 2 authors gave feedback and added content. But what it really means for you is, if you're using one of the levels and you've got a complaint about it, you talk to the author whose name is in the biggest letters. And if this is just the best course book you've ever used, you can come and tell any of us, it's fine. Okay. All right. So, we're going to give you a little insight into National Geographic and how we turned it into EFL course books. Now, our starting point was to think about what does National Geographic do really well. And we wanted to reflect those things in our course book. So, one thing it does really well is it gets students' interest, it gets readers' interest and engages them. And it does this a great deal of time through strong photography. Now, quite often it takes themes that you're familiar with, i.e. bungee jumping or sport, but comes at it from a different angle. So we wanted to reflect that in the course books, and it sits very nicely with EFL course books need to get students' interest and engage them immediately. Now, obviously, we wanted the course books to also teach, present language, and National Geographic has lots of good text, lots of good articles that we could make use of and turn into course material. But what I didn't know 2 years ago when we started on the project, there's also a vast resource of audio material and video material, which we'll talk about later on because we've been able to incorporate that into the material as well. The third thing about National Geographic material is that it's very good at taking universal themes so that when you look at National Geographic, you find an article and you think, well, I know a little bit about that in relationship to my own country or where I'm from. But then you discover there's something you didn't know because National Geographic is very good at taking a universal kind of theme and then coming at it from a totally different angle. Now, when you write a course book as an author, you want something that appeals to a wide range of students, particularly if it's a course book that you're going to use in different countries. And you've got students from different countries, different cultures, so you need to choose topics of universal themes, and you'll be familiar with them if you've taught with the books: sport, free time, business, shopping, history, those kinds of topics. But when you come to National Geographic, it'll take a theme like that, and then suddenly it inserts something that makes you go, wow. And that's what we wanted to try and do with the books. Now, I'll give you an example. Here we've got our chap bungee jumping. And if you're a language teacher, imagine it's pre-intermediate level, it's lesson 3, you know what's coming next. It's, do you like da, da, da? Yes, I do. No, I don't. What do you do in your free time? And you're off. You've got a lesson, okay, with the image. It's a kind of universal theme, and lots of course books do it. The problem is it starts to get a bit bland. So wouldn't it be much more interesting if we approached the topic of throwing yourself off large, tall things and dealt with it in this way? Now, this is interesting. This is a still from a National Geographic video, and it predates bungee jumping, because what it is a tribe on the island of Vanuatu, which is somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. And the boys, at a certain age, when they're about 12 or 13, part of their rite of passage is to build an enormous tower somewhere in the jungle. They climb to the top of it. They tie 2 vines to their ankles. They throw themselves off the top of the tower. And if the vines don't break, the boy doesn't hit the ground and he passes into manhood. If the vines break, the boy gets really hurt and doesn't pass into manhood. He stays into boyhood. And that's just an example of what I mean with National Geographic. You're reading about a topic, you think of sort of, oh yeah, bungee jumping and so on, and then you suddenly read about this, you turn the page, and there's suddenly something kind of similar but very different and very diverse, and it's exposing you to different cultures, different parts of the world that you just don't see normally in course books or deal with in classrooms. But it's important because it doesn't treat all our students as though they're the same and that they're from the same places and they're all middle class and wealthy. They come from lots of different places and they see the world in many different ways. And that's what's interesting about the material, and it's the third thing that we've tried to pick out with the book. So just to sum up what we're going to just explore in the next 10 or 15 minutes. We wanted the books to engage in interest, because that's what National Geographic does. We obviously want them to teach language. We took topics and themes which we regard as universal in one way, but also we approach them in quite a diverse way with different texts so that students have to suddenly reassess the way they look at something. And the fourth thing we wanted the books to do, because National Geographic does it all the time, is that students learn about something new. Now, by that, I don't mean they necessarily come out of the lesson saying, you say, what did you learn today? And they say, oh, I learned the past simple, although they might say that. But they also say, but I learned about this really amazing island where these people build this tower and they throw themselves off. And they actually find something else new about the world as well as learning English, because I think it'll make it more memorable for them. But those are the 4 points, the 4 things that we've tried to focus on with the books to reflect that National Geographic ethos. And now I'm going to hand over to Paul, who's going to talk a little bit about the process of taking that material and turning it into teaching material. Off you go.
Okay. Let's just look at each one of those points one by one. We'll begin with engage and interest. We had a rather unusual brief when writing these books. That's to say, we approached the writing of them in a way that was a little foreign to me, a little strange. And that was simply this: start with the image. Because that's what National Geographic does incredibly well. That's how it engages your interest and draws the reader in, with a dramatic photograph and very often an intriguing title. And this was actually, for me, and I hope for the other writers as well, something of a revelation when it came to writing. Normally you would start with a language point. You'd start from the point of view of a functional area, a piece of grammar, a lexical set maybe, a topic. But what happens when you start with an image, it inevitably takes you down an interesting path, very often an unexpected path. And our real hope for these books is that they do that for you as teachers, but they do that principally for the learner as well, that it takes them somewhere interesting. This is an example from the upper intermediate level of a picture. So I was researching pictures, first of all looking for pictures. I came across this one. This is a picture of the Burj Al Khalifa, taken from the top of the Burj Al Khalifa in Dubai, a preposterously tall building. A fabulous photograph because it shows how a building there on the right, or other skyscrapers that you can see down there, which would seem high by any other standard, are actually dwarfed by this building. And from that built a unit on development, on social development, sustainable development, and in this case, urban development. The title tells the story of Dubai, just a little play on words, but it takes you from the reality that Dubai was, that is a small, sleepy fishing village about 40, 50 years ago, to this sort of crazy metropolis, fantastical metropolis that it is now, a city of first, world's tallest building, the world's biggest shopping mall, perhaps the world's 2 or 3 biggest shopping malls, in fact, the world's largest motorway intersection, and so on. So in the books, each unit begins with, this is what we call a unit opener, with a dramatic photograph, a stunning photograph. And the point about these photographs is that they do 3 things. First of all, they demand an immediate emotional response from you. Secondly, they begin to arouse your interest. Hopefully they begin to arouse your interest. And thirdly, they stimulate discussion. So in this case, you look at the picture, the first thing you get is a pleasant, attractive geometrical pattern on a nice, colourful background. It then arouses your interest. You start to look at it more closely, and you ask yourself, who are these people? Where are they? What are they doing? Why are they lying on mats or sleeping on mats, perhaps? You then listen to the news story behind it, and you discover that these are the parents of first-year university students in China. And they've come to be with their children, young students, during the first week of their study. Because of China's former single-child policy, these parents are very concerned about them, very involved in their children's future, very ambitious for their children's future. They're also often not very well off, and so they can't afford to stay in hotels. So the universities put them up. This is actually just a small detail of it, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them. The university has put them up on the gym floor, and that's what you see. So that then stimulates discussion. Is that a culturally specific thing? Is that something specific to China, to have such a high level of investment and high level of ambition for your children's future? Certainly when I took my children to university, I only spent a couple of hours with them, I think, before coming back. And my parents didn't even take me to the station. So that's a culturally interesting thing, and that's where it goes. John.
As well as the photographs that we've used that are interesting, it's also some of the characters involved in National Geographic are interesting, and we're going to hear from one of them later. But in particular, this is one of my favorites. This is a guy called Takacs, who's Hungarian, lives in the States, but spends his life traveling around the world. And I wanted, you know, in a day in the life of an EFL author, I'm suddenly at the unit and we're going to deal with travel and holidays. And I thought, God, I wonder how National Geographic explorers spend their holidays, because they spend all their lives traveling around the world. They probably just sort of sit at home and drink beer and watch TV for a couple of weeks or something and relax. But I had the opportunity, one thing I enjoyed about the project was, instead of scripting listenings, some of the time I was able to set about interviewing real people. And I interviewed Takacs, who is obsessed with snakes. He's a herpetologist, and he goes all over the place looking for snakes. And so it's kind of a bit embarrassing, really, because you interview somebody who's got a doctorate and spends his life looking for snakes, and you say, so what do you do on your holidays? And it was really interesting, actually, because he said, well, obviously, I look for more snakes. And I said, well, do you ever go on holiday, go to a hotel? Or what? He said, yes, sometimes I take a girlfriend. Note the use of the indefinite article there. And I did wonder whether I correct him, but he did actually mean I take a girlfriend. Clearly, heptology is quite an aphrodisiac amongst women. And I got a great interview with him where he gave me this description of when he goes on holiday, he takes a girlfriend, she sits by the pool at the hotel enjoying herself, and he heads off out into the jungle looking for more snakes. Not only that, he gets the snakes and puts this device on their fangs, removes the poison so he can then study the venom. So this was TACAC. So again, it's, as well as the opening images, we've got these short listenings that go with the images as part of that interest and engagement. Okay. Paul.
So the books also teach language, you'll be glad to hear. I don't want to go into too much detail about it. Suffice to say all the elements are there: grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, functional language, and so on. One point worth noting, though, is they always do this in a highly contextualized way. That is to say, when you're doing a grammar exercise, say, on determiners, you're continuing to learn more, a practice exercise, you're continuing to learn more about the topic. There are two things, though, that we would like to draw more attention to, two key features of the book, which lend themselves to this approach and to the use of National Geographic material. One is critical thinking, and the other is integrated video, which John will talk about in a moment. Critical thinking. The point about it is that when you present such information-rich content, when you're giving the students a lot of information to process through audio, through video, and through often quite meaty reading texts, what you want them to do is to apply some critical thinking skills to that processing of information. You want them to think about it in a way, not just accept the author's point of view, but to think about it in a way that's rational, that's independent, and that's inquiring. So we've included in the books a critical thinking syllabus, that is to say, questioning the author's purpose in writing the piece, looking at their arguments, are their arguments supported and justified, and so on. This example we've picked out because it was actually a case taken from National Nat Geo TV rather than the magazine. In case you thought everything was from the magazine, it's not. There's a lot of stuff also. Nat Geo isn't just a magazine, as you know, it's probably a channel and so on. So this one's taken from Nat Geo TV, and it's a case of a pilot who was trying to bring a plane into land at Heathrow, and the engines failed. And he just managed to bring it in and land it safely. No one was injured, and he was feted as a hero for it. Shortly after that, a whispering campaign began, first among the crew and then among the media, that he had frozen at the controls. And so this tells that story, tells the story from different perspectives, and the students are asked to apply critical thinking skills to decide on what the truth of the matter was, which different sides of the argument carry more weight, are better justified, and so on.
I mentioned at the beginning I was surprised, as well as written text, there's an incredible selection of audio and video material from National Geographic. You can, if you want to use National Geographic video, there's a whole bank of it on the website. But what we've done with the books is we've included a DVD at the back of the book with 12 videos, and each video goes with each unit. Now, the video itself is original, authentic, on-screen National Geographic material. In some cases, we've rewritten the narration because quite a few are documentary-based. But we've kind of graded it down to the level, but we've also made sure that we've recycled and extended the vocabulary in the unit. Now, one thing that makes it, dare I say, different to approaches of using DVD with other books in the past is that we've said the video is an integral part of the unit. We've decided that most students can use the DVDs, or the teachers can use them in the classroom. So we wanted to bring the video as part of the unit, so that when you're looking through a unit in the books later on, you will find a spread that might look like this. It's got an image connected with the video that they're going to watch, and then they've got before, while, and after you watch activities linked to the DVD. So we're assuming that it's going to be integrated as part of the teaching process. If for some reason you couldn't use it in the classroom, there's also suggestions in the teacher's book on how you'd use it for self-study. But the important thing is it is thoroughly integrated so that the vocabulary and the language structures dealt with are recycling what's in the unit. So it's a kind of a key feature of the book. Okay.
The third point John mentioned in his list was universal and diverse. You can't actually think of a better source for themes, topics, subject matter, which is at the same time universal and diverse than National Geographic. Just a few quick examples. Sport, he already gave the example of this unusual bungee jumping. Sport here represented by buffalo racing in India. Art and creativity represented by this young Chinese virtuoso busker. John, the next one. History by Queen Hatshepsut. I can't believe I pronounced that correctly. Queen Hatshepsut, otherwise known as the king herself, who ruled Egypt for a period of over 20 years, in fact, as a king, even though she was a woman. Science and technology represented by these, a kind of innovation technology for the developing world. Silicon glasses, there are little pumps on the side here which feed the lens and adjust the strength of the lens. So it's a kind of poor man's varifocal, if you like. Each time these things are teaching you something new at the same time. It's what John was talking about earlier, the gift of giving students something new, some new piece of information. If I think back to when I first started teaching 20, maybe 25 years ago, and I think of the things now that I can remember from then, they weren't actually what Madonna had for breakfast. They're more things like what Desmond Morris had to say about man-watching, about body language and gesture and posture and so on. Tony Buzan talking about memory and methods for memorizing things. I could have listed maybe 50 things that I'd learnt here, sort of interesting little marvels about the world and about human nature and so on that I'd learnt while writing this course. I've just picked out two. The first one is something about orangutans. We all know they're sort of friendly and sociable creatures. What you probably didn't know, and I didn't know certainly, was they're also very kind and generous creatures, so that if you gave one some food, a biscuit, a banana, something like that, they'll break it in two and hand you back the other half, which is more than I could say for myself. The second one is a very good idea if you're interested in the environment and also want to annoy your local council. This is something called reverse graffiti, and as practiced by a guy in the road tunnels in Sao Paulo. And it's called reverse graffiti because rather than spraying paint on walls, what he does is he removes dirt from walls on polluted car tunnels running through Sao Paulo. This, of course, completely confused and confounded the council in Sao Paulo in Brazil because they had a policy to obliterate all graffiti. And so the only way they could obliterate this graffiti was actually by cleaning off this stuff. He did it in various other tunnels, and in the end, he managed to get all the tunnels, car tunnels in Sao Paulo completely cleaned. Yeah.
So we just want to sum up the 4 points. We hope the books will engage and interest you and your students in particular. We hope that they'll teach them language. A real key difference, we hope that the book deals with universal themes, but also things that are very diverse that you just won't see in other course books, dare I say. And also that your students walk out of the lesson feeling that they've learnt about something new. That was our mini checklist for when we were writing them. Now that they've come out and they look great on the stand, we hope you'll go away, try them out, and see if you can apply this checklist and if we've actually achieved that with these books. We think we have. We'll see what you say, but thank you very much for coming. We do want to finish and take the opportunity for a few thanks.
Yes, just a few thank you to everyone who's been involved in this project. The publishing team in creating these absolutely beautiful books. Really, my own is the first time tonight that I've seen it. I think they're absolutely stunning. the publishing team, headed by Jason Mann, the design team, the sales team in advance, and, and for putting on this fantastic event also. But really, we as authors would like particularly to thank the editors who've been involved in getting these books into readable and usable shape. That is Liz Driscoll, Shona Roger, Jess Rackham, Jen Noonan, Katie Wright, and last but not least, the person who's overseen the project and managed the project so fantastically and brought it to fruition, and that's Karen Spiller.
Thank
here.
you.
So thanks very much.
All right, and just to finish off, I'm going to show you this page from the book because it's a unit that looks into the world of disappearing languages, which is a topic that I spent a lot of time watching the videos, reading about, and became particularly interested in of the number of languages that are disappearing around the world. But I'm showing it to you in particular because the photograph on the front is taken by a guy called Chris Rainier. Now, I've seen Chris's photos, I've looked at loads of them, I've watched him on video, I've read about him in text, but I've never actually seen him in the flesh until this evening. So, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you, gentlemen. That was very informative, very exciting, and some of the images indeed did look familiar. And thank you so much for all the folks that put this together. What a dazzling place. The two authors and I were talking about putting on top hats and dancing down the elevator on stage. What I'd like to do tonight is talk about stories. I am a photographer, I'm a visual storyteller. I head up a program at National Geographic under my fellowship on endangered languages. Indeed, every 2 weeks we lose a traditional language. An elder passes away. With 80% of the world's languages being oral, when that elder passes away, it's like burning down a library of information. So language is at the core of what we're talking about tonight. Visual language is what I'll be talking about, but embedded in the visual language is our stories. And I'd love to the backdrop of some images, share some stories that I've picked up along the way, along the trail. I've used photography as my passport, as my teacher, as a way to see the four corners of the planet and dive into cultures that are beyond our imagination. So what I'd love to do is just have you strap in. We're going to go around the world in less than 80 days and take you to a number of places where sitting with elders, sitting with shamans, sitting with normal people like you and I, and sharing stories. And that's the beauty of language, that we can all communicate. So one of the first places I journeyed to was Varanasi, the city of light, the oldest city in India. For a Hindu to die in Varanasi naturally is to be ensured of the ultimate transformation into enlightenment, ending the cycle of karma. Each morning people come down to the Ganges, a river that flows from the high Himalayas, to pray and bathe in the early white light of Varanasi. Varanasi is home to Lord Brahma, the creator, Lord Shiva, the destroyer, the two most powerful Hindu gods. The struggle between these two forces is the struggle of good and bad, light and dark, divinity to Dante's Inferno. Here you'll find the Lord of the Untouchables, the keeper of the burning guts, and the spirit being that holds the key to a person's reincarnation. So too in Varanasi you will find the worshippers of Lord Rama, tattooed across their entire being. And with his morning offerings to the river Ganges, a Hindu man can be assured life is again in karmic balance. Traveling east of India, you end up in Asia. Asia is of two worlds. One world is the slow ticking of time in the tropical forest where the mind moves reluctantly and spirits hold their own ancient forms. And here amongst the musty decay of monuments to Buddha, nature takes a stance and reclaims all that man has made. My interest was to go into this part of the world, Cambodia, Thailand, to not only photograph the archaeological sites, but as well to photograph some of the traditional tattooing. I just completed a 10-year study on traditional body tattooing from around the world. The book was called Ancient Marks. And one of the epicenters of that tradition is right here in Southeast Asia. They have an unusual combination of Buddhism and animistic beliefs. This gentleman has a pig tattooed on his stomach, a Garuda or a monkey on his chest, and yet he's a Buddhist. And so they combine the worship of both. In this area, so too, they worship the elephant, and you can see the elephant tattooed along the legs of this particular gentleman. It's a combination of worshiping the deities, the spirits that live in the forest, with their particular Buddhism. In fact, some Buddhists believe in not marking the body, so they have what's called white magic tattooing. It's a sacred coconut oil that a shaman will tattoo into their skin, symbolically putting the tattoo below the skin. So you can't see the tattoo, but all of the protection that one garnishes from having the tattoos lies within the body. This gentleman right here at Bayon Temple in Angkor Wat was one of the sole survivors when the Khmer Rouge swept through Cambodia in the 1970s, and he protected many of the archaeological sites, and so too is tattooed. The other dimension of Asia is that of the ultra high-tech world like Japan, where the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, are both feared and respected. When I did this project on tattooing and body modification and scarification, I also wanted to deal with the Yakuza. They have some of the most amazing, incredible tattoos. Even as Asia has become the epicenter of modern technology, the concrete and glass buildings echo with the roar of busy motorbikes and buses, while smog collects about the serene face of Buddha. An Asian today walks in the dual worlds of the sacred and modernity. One of my favorite places to travel is Africa. My father is South African, and I've just, in fact, come back 3 days ago from a huge project in West Africa. And I went to Egypt on assignment for National Geographic about 10 years ago, and I arranged to sleep up on one of the pyramids on a full moon. I like to photograph PowerPoints, sacred places around the planet on a full moon. The Taj Mahal, Machu Picchu, Easter Island, and here the pyramids. And this image is taken the day after. I'm walking back to my vehicle. Often in January and February around the pyramids there's a mist. I took one last look over my shoulder. The mist had burned off and the pyramids was sitting there. And if you wait long enough in this particular area, you'll see the Bedouins coming in on their camels from as far away as western Egypt and even as far as Chad. And they come and they just sort of jump off their camels in euphoria and pray towards the pyramids. I fell in love with the Sahara Desert. I fell in love with the concept of journeying further into the desert. And so what I did was put together an expedition. We traveled out of the country of Mali, which is in the west part of the Sahara Desert, traveled north out of Timbuktu to this ancient salt mine, some 14 days by camel. And actually the images are getting cropped from when we looked at them. I don't know if we can do anything about that. And so as we left Timbuktu on the camels, I was talking to the guide and he kept talking about the eye of the needle. What is the eye of the needle? I kept asking him, and he said, you'll see. About 4 or 5 days out, there's a series of sand dunes that run east to west across the Sahara Desert, and there's only one place that they can take the camel caravans as we headed north, indeed called the eye of the needle. And then we would pass through these little oases out in the Sahara Desert where you'd see the men veiled. Often these men are Tuareg militia that were in the Tuareg rebellion. They run stolen cars from the Mediterranean down into Black Africa. Very edgy place and very full of mystery. You head out and you come across these small, again, little oases with these adobe mosques where the men gather on Friday afternoon, come in, pray, and after their formal prayers are over, they'll sit under the shafts of light during the midday and read their Quran. And if you're lucky enough to linger in these areas, you might come across a wedding or the celebration of the end of Ramadan, where the women have hennaed their hands and these spectacular designs across their hands and their feet. And as you're heading north, you come across these old ancient archaeological ruins, often covered in sand as the sand continuously blows. Very, very mystical, spiritual place. Often driving or riding on the camels late in the afternoon, try to wrap the experience around the moonlight so you can journey during the evening and early morning hours, because even during the winter, temperatures in the Sahara get up to 100, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So you want to travel in the coolest part of the day. And then you arrive at this amazing scene out of the Bible. A salt mine with black African slaves still working, and these salt blocks being chipped away, and it is quite spectacular. It's a place that has been worked since the 12th century, an industry that continues year in, year out, and it's fascinating because it's a tradition that keeps the social fabric of this indigenous traditional culture together. They can get European salt a lot easier than actually all of this work going up to the salt mine. But it is the tradition of the fathers taking the sons out into the desert and teaching them the ways of the desert that keeps the social fabric of the community together. If you take that thread out, that tradition out, the whole society begins to unravel. And this is so true of many indigenous cultures around the world. After the camels have been loaded up, we started heading south, and the salt ends up down in Timbuktu and Mopti and is broken up and sold all over West Africa. If you head further south in Mali, you come across the Dogon culture. This culture, indigenous culture, that has withstood the onslaught of Islam that swept through this whole area during the 12th and 13th century. The young initiates, the young boys, as they go through their initiation ritual, one of those rituals is to hold this mask, the Sergei mask, in their teeth. It's not bound to their head. They hold it in their teeth and they dance back and forth. And for that period of time, they are the conduit between the spiritual world and the earthly world, and the messages pass through them and through the masks. Heading further south, you arrive in Burkina Faso. And this is the epicenter of a lot of what would be called the primitive art of West Africa. The masks that informed many of the artists of the Cubist period came from this area. And then indeed, that's where I was last week, in this particular area in Burkina Faso, photographing some of the mask rituals. And then the image is cropped, but you head on over into Ethiopia, where the Mercy tribe live. It's hard to see, but that image is of a lip plate. And in this southern part of Ethiopia, the Omo Valley, the tradition is the young girls have their lower lip slit, and then a larger, thank you very much, a larger lip plate is inserted in there, and that is a form of beauty and a form of wealth. So it turns our whole notion of beauty upside down when you see cultures like this. You head to the northern part of Ethiopia, one of my favorite places in Africa, and again, surrounded by a sea of Islam, is a Coptic Christian enclave, Lalibela. That church right there is about 50 feet by 50 feet. It's embedded into the rock. It's been etched out of the rock, and here is the priest that holds on to the Coptic cross. My interest in the area was not only the archaeology, but was also the traditional tattooing. Again, as we know, Ethiopians are very handsome people. This woman has a beautiful set of tattoos all the way down across her chest in the form of a Coptic cross. I had always wanted to have the experience of kind of walking through the plains of Masai Mara and Serengeti. And I put together a little expedition with Jackson, the gentleman on the right, a Maasai guide. And I hired him. He had gone to Nairobi, gotten frustrated with the modern ways of life, had come back to his Maasai village, spoke impeccable English, and was really being groomed to be the chief of the village. And I just wanted to walk, and we walked on the outside perimeter of the Masai Mara, camped out under the stars, walking by lions and herds of elephants, and it felt like the day after creation. It was a profound experience, firing him with questions during that whole period of time. And on the last night around the campfire, as all of the Maasai young people were dancing in their traditional beautiful way and we were talking, he said, "Chris, I've answered many of your questions. I'd like to ask you some questions about your culture." I said, "I'll try. What are your initiation rituals? What do you do in your culture? What do you do in your culture when the elders are too old to look after the cattle? What do you do in your culture to look after the land so it's sustainable for future generations?" And I kind of stammered. I couldn't really answer what are our initiation rituals in a modern culture. In fact, he had read about a Navajo elder. He had read a magazine about the southwest part of the United States where the Native Americans not only preserved the land for the next generation, but 7 generations. It was a story that stuck in my diary, and I'll loop back into it in a moment. In 1985, I had a chance to go to New Guinea. It's an island just north of Australia. It's a place where the masks still dance, where the culture is still alive, where the traditions and the spirits of the forest are still alive. The initiation rituals of birth and death and war and marriage are played out on a daily level. Wanted to explore, and I ended up spending 10 years of my life there systematically documenting all the traditional mask rituals and traditions of both Papua New Guinea, which is the eastern side, which gained its independence in 1975, and Irian Jaya, which is the western part. Often traveling by dugout canoe or flying in, putting together an expedition from a small runway and walking for weeks on end. And it was indeed full of rituals. This man has come back from the city. He was employed in Port Moresby, and he's being initiated, baptized, and then initiated into a warrior status within his village. Whoops. And we were walking along through a trail once and came around the corner, and there was this man, wonderful birds of paradise feathers, and my guide and translator was sitting there with me, and I asked a very Western question. I said, because he was looking up into the tree, and the tree was full of birds of paradise birds, and I'm sure he was trying to figure out if he could shoot one down and add the feathers to his plumage. I said, "How many birds are there?" And my translator turned around and in the local language started talking to them and sort of talked back and forth. And in a very embarrassed tone, the translator said, "Chris, we don't have words for numbers. We don't count." And I thought for a second, wow, this is crazy, primitive culture. And then I stopped myself and I said, no, wait a minute. If I am indeed going to travel around the world, I have to learn to ask the right questions. We codify the world in our own reference points. And I think what travel has taught me, if anything, is to reserve judgment, to put it to a side, and to really learn and listen and pay attention to asking the right questions. Because obviously there was a reason they didn't have a numbering system, and I had to dig deeper to understand that. They often get together for these sing-sings, these wonderful celebrations where they paint themselves up in traditional ochres and fabric and parts of the forest. These are the black and white men. These sing-sings are around a birth, around a celebration of war, honoring someone passing away, someone successfully getting a job in the city, whatever it is, they'll have these incredible sing-sings. About halfway through my trip, I was over in Irian Jaya. I had hiked in. I was 3 weeks in, and I got wind that this young boy was going to be initiated into adulthood. So we started hiking towards his valley. And we came up and over that ridge, dropped down, came up the hill, and at the top of the hill was an elder sitting there, smiling, watching me huff and puff my way up the hill. We got to the top, I sat down beside him, and through the translator he said, "Which valley are you from?" And New Guinea is extraordinarily isolated. Over 2,000 languages, not dialects, languages exist in this small island. If there's 6,000 languages on the planet, that's a significant amount of languages in one particular area. They're extraordinarily isolated, so very rarely do they go out of their valley, and certainly very rarely do they see anybody with white skin. So he kept pursuing, which valley are you from? And I kept smiling and said, oh, I'm from many, many valleys away. He said, no, which valley? And then he smiled and he said, I know. You're from where the green meets the blue. He had heard of this place, the color of the sky ending, turning into the color of, obviously, the ocean. And I wrote that down in my journal, and I thought, what an amazing thing, because we're all from where the green meets the blue. We're from this small, fragile planet existing that we need to pay more attention to. You go down onto the Sepik River area and they worship the crocodile. They believe all man came from the mouth of the crocodile, to the point where the boys are initiated into the crocodile clan, and they're scarred both front and back and accepted into the crocodile clan. As much as life and birth is a part of their culture, so is war. This is up in the Balim, outside of the Balim Valley. In the Irian Jaya side, they wear these rattan skirts and these penis sheaths. They have no utilitarian value whatsoever. Just think, young man, Porsche, showing off. So, again, as a part of this documentation, I wanted to show the rituals of war in this book. At that particular time, I was a contract photographer for Time magazine and was covering many of the conflicts of the end of the 20th century. And I was in and out of Sarajevo covering the siege of Sarajevo. And just before I started hiking back into this valley, got a call from Time magazine, said, can you be in Sarajevo in about a month, month and a half, rotating out of photographer? I said, sure. Took off, took us several weeks to hike back in, heard about this battle, spent a couple of days photographing it, hiked back out, got on a plane, changed planes in Zagreb, and next thing you know, I was in the thick of the Bosnian War within about 4 or 5 days. And I was sitting there one night writing in my journal, what an incredible experience. I've gone from the Stone Age to modern Europe within a matter of days. And we actually have the conceit that we have evolved, and yet all we've evolved is the sophistication of the weapons of how we kill each other. It's a point that stuck deeply in me. This is down on the southwest part of Irian Jaya. This is actually where Michael Rockefeller disappeared, and I was fascinated with his story as well as the art from that particular area. And these are the war canoes. So the men were just out on a kind of exercise one afternoon, and I went out and photographed with them. They believe in the world of the hereafter. When someone passes away, they go back into the earth. When someone passes away, the women will cover themselves with mud and put anywhere up to 200 Job's tears, these sort of bands of beads around their neck. And for each day, they will take off a strand of beads. So the mourning process can take up to anywhere up to almost 9 months. In another area, down in the Asmat area again, this woman's husband has passed away. She's not allowed to look at anybody for a period of time, so she's in mourning and hiding. The two brothers shave their head. But most interestingly is the rattan necklace. That is a symbolic connection to the spirit. It is only when that necklace rots off is the spirit free to go into the afterworld. On the last trip of my expedition, a guide that I had been using for years and years passed away. We took his body back to his village, and in their village, they built a spirit canoe, a symbolic canoe with all the different totems of his clan, his family, his village, and they set it off at sunset for him to go off into the spiritual world. And on the very, very last trip in 1995, I had wanted to see if we could discover a tribe that had never seen white people before. And we had heard about an area up in the northwest corner of New Guinea in Irian Jaya called the Bird's Head, that possibly there were some tribes that lived beyond the edge of the map. And we hiked back in. Sure enough, about 3 weeks, we came across this tribe, and it was one of those beautiful experiences as an explorer that you wish to have, to make contact, to sit in peace through a nonverbal communication, communicate what it means to be human. Spent about a week there. This is the last afternoon before we were taking off. A bright sunny day. Thunderstorm came up the valley. Everybody got out their very fashionable banana leaf raincoats. The storm passed. The kids were frolicking around. The sun was setting. And I looked up in the sky. And some 30,000 feet above me was a jet trailing across. Everybody paused, kind of looked at me. I looked at them. And it was probably from Sydney or Brisbane on its way to Kuala Lumpur or Singapore or Bangkok. And I wrote in my journal, what an amazing time to be alive. What an amazing time for all of us to be alive at this crossroads of human evolution, where there are people that still live beyond the edge of the map, that dance with one foot in the Garden of Eden, and yet we have all this amazing, amazing technology. So here we are now barely into the 21st century. Let us take one last look over our shoulder at the millennium behind us. What cultural traditions do we leave behind, and which ones do we carry with us in this new century of technology and information and profound cultural choices? How will these new tools affect us? Very soon, with the internet, the Navajo elder will indeed share his stories with Jackson, my Maasai guide, while an Ethiopian priest, after his first prayers and before the morning light falls on his computer, will be emailing his shaman friend in Asia. And why not? There are cyber cafes in Timbuktu and smartphones in the jungles of New Guinea. Indeed, we are all a part of a modern planet yearning now more than ever for a dialogue among civilizations. Let us use these new tools of technology to celebrate ancient traditions, to build profound bridges of communication, and share the stories of cultures living on the edge that lie deep in the desert of our existence. So the program that I head up at National Geographic is really about celebrating culture, celebrating the diversity, celebrating the opportunity for all of us to gather around the fireplace of humanity and share stories. It's an exciting period of time. The argument is often, well, why bring technology into culture? Many, many, many cultures are embracing the internet, embracing smartphones, to archive, to preserve, to empower their culture, to have a voice in the modern 21st century dialogue. If the world is really going to be flat, if we're talking about the world being flat, then everybody needs to have a voice and a seat at that table. So what I'd like to do tonight is finish up with a quote from my first book. So as the chainsaws fell the last trees that hide the first peoples, we're alive at an amazing moment in human evolution. The rich tapestry of human culture, that fabric that is made up of the dazzling array of man's diversity, is at a crucial crossroads. Will we let go and sever that fragile umbilical cord to our primeval past, finding ourselves truly alone, without cultural purpose, adrift in a vast sea of space with nowhere to go? Or will we make a different choice? It is my hope that we can all gather around the fireplace of humanity and continue for generations to tell the stories of what it means to be alive on a planet that has survived the 21st century. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank Chris for that fantastic talk, absolutely mind-boggling. I was just wondering where the body was in that last photograph. It looked incredible, like a giant big bird. But just to say, Michelle, is everybody now to move in that direction? Thank you for your patience, and hope you enjoyed the evening, and certainly some more drinks and so on out there. So if you'd like to sort of scoot out, I can't actually see anything because I can only see a white light. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming.